The symbolism in this story is so clear. And then, of course, Swamiji just says the words right out loud. The oil refers to our devotion, and those souls who were practicing devotion, who had their hearts full of devotion, were able to receive the divine, and those who didn't couldn't. It sounds simple. It probably actually is simple. But again, as we know of so many of these spiritual teachings, it's not always easy. This past week, as Lahari was saying, a dear friend of many of ours, Christy Norfleet, who is married to Doug, and they've been together running the Scotts Valley Center, transitioned out of her body after several years now of fighting a good fight with a breast cancer that she had. And as many times as I've watched people leave their bodies, which has happened to me a lot, I've mentioned this before in here, both because of my profession and because of some strange karma that only God himself could ever understand. If it's not in a hospital, it's on an airplane or on the road, or a lot of relatives. It's been a strange thing that I've gone through, but I've, in a way, had the privilege of being around many people as they've left, the soul has left the body. But there was something very unusual about what happened with Christy. And I'd like to speak about this reading today, or at least the first part of what I'd like to say, vis-a-vis her life in these last few years. I've never seen anything quite like it. I had the great good fortune to be, I think many of us were, but me too, I'll say, very involved with Christy over the last couple of years. I spent a lot of time with her. And I just watched her go through a lot of phases with this cancer. And I think most importantly, there's a couple of things. One is, right up until a week before she left, she was talking to me about the miracle of how she was going to beat the cancer. And she really looked like the Dickens, I'll tell you, when she was saying that. She did not look like somebody who was going to be able to make it through this cancer, but she was strong about it. She was committed to continue to look for miracles. So that was one part of her that I really admired. It was like healthy denial at first, but then it really went into a lot of effort on her part. I was only admiring of it. That's what I want to say, all along. But the other thing that happened to Christy over these years is that more and more and more, her life became centered around her path and spiritual teachings. There was never a time where I went to see Christy in these years where we didn't wind up our conversation, even though we might have started out talking about the worst part of chemo for her was going to be that she had to lose her hair. I'd say, really? That's the worst thing for you? I mean, we would start out at the mundane often, but we always wound up reading to each other, talking about, discussing something spiritual, experiences she had, dreams she was having. And though that fight in her, in a certain way, to stay in the body, didn't leave until 24 hours before she actually left, she was moving her energy constantly towards the divine, constantly. It was very impressive. And when I was reading this reading, which was right after she passed, I was looking at what the reading is for this week. I thought, When we think about going through life and we have this work before us of trying to keep our lamps filled with oil, our hearts filled with devotion, because it's that devotion that God is looking for. It's that devotion in our hearts that allows us to receive Him. And we can think of it day by day, but when you're there with somebody who you know in the next hour or two will be taking their last breath, it's so right in front of you. It's a very powerful experience, very powerful. Asha and I were both there, and we both spoke about it. 1 minute, somebody's breathing, though she wasn't taking great deep breaths, but she was not suffering. She was totally at peace. And then there's that final exhalation, and the soul leaves the body, and you see that moment in various ways that we're all on our path for. Everything we do on our path is for that, not just for when we die, literally die, but moment by moment as we take an in-breath and we send it out. And in that instant, there's that calmness, that total stillness and centeredness between each breath. So it's not just about leaving the body. Finally, it's how do we live in the body and really get more and more in touch with the divine, ready to receive the divine. And as I've watched her, I'd like to share with you a few things that came to mind. I learned a lot from Christy. Mostly, I learned a lot from her in the ways that she did all of this and succeeded. But even when she wasn't succeeding in the moment, I learned. The first is that we must make our spiritual path not just techniques or moments, coming to Sunday service, dropping in at a Christmas caroling party tonight, meditating in the morning. We have to make it a way of life. Because when we make it a way of life, as we practice in each living moment as often as we can remember, we can't be taken by surprise, no matter what happens. I remember many years ago, the first earthquake that I was in after I moved back to California. I was in an elevator in the hospital in Santa Clara, so it had about 12 floors. I don't know what floors we were between, but being in a big earthquake in an elevator that's shaking in that shaft, I was terrified. And the only thing I could think of, and I was in the elevator, and I was in a white coat with my stethoscope, and I was the doctor and staff, but all I could think about is if that door opened, I was out of there. And fortunately, the door didn't open soon enough that I had a chance to collect myself and say, Shanti, you stand still. Everybody else goes out first. But it was not where I was. And when that earthquake was over, because I didn't tell anybody that I was about to trample them to get out, which I was, but I did say to myself, you need to practice. You need to be ready for these moments. And it hit me. And many things have happened in life since then. They're small stories like that. I have not yet been given a cancer or some crisis like that. But when we make our spiritual practices a way of life, we get to practice with the smaller things so that when big things happen, we're ready. We don't panic. We know really where we need to go, what we need to do. We remember to call on God and the masters. We remember to breathe and to follow our breath, to calm our emotions. That's the first thing. The next thing is that we really need to start making an effort to be in a constant dialogue with the divine, to be talking to God all the time. For me, it's like, Master, let's go here. We're going to bed now. Are you going to come to this movie with me? Certainly when I'm working. I never want to see a patient without Master with me. I don't want to sit in my office here and talk to anybody without Master with me, because it's a language that we learn. And then we're not trying to learn a brand new language when we have just a few minutes left or when the crisis hits. We really need to practice these things. I watched Christy do that. She used to send me emails that were her prayers, her poems, pieces from writings that she particularly loved. She was practicing. She was learning a language. She was talking about God more and more. We need to practice staying awake. It's not easy. I was thinking about what it means to really stay awake and be ready. You know, and you can't help but remember that Jesus asked his disciples, please stay awake with me. I'm frightened tonight. He said that to them, and they all promptly went to sleep. Those were his main disciples. What does that mean? It is hard. You know, this spiritual path, just to give ourselves a lot of room and a lot of credit. We had a Kriya initiation here yesterday, which just means initiating people into a particular type of meditation that we do. And just to prepare myself for that, to have myself in the right frame of mind, I listened to a lot of old initiations that are accessible to us, not to everybody, but to Kriya Bonds online. It was a wonderful thing to do. But one of the things that Swami Kriyananda said during one of those initiations that stayed with me, and I mentioned this yesterday, is just, he was very sweetly, I don't remember, he was talking about maintaining your practice of meditation. Because, you know, we all dive in. We all know next month in January, meditation classes are going to be full. Probably many of us in this room will decide we'll meditate longer. And then by February, it's a lot harder, and we're looking back at our New Year's resolutions. The spiritual path is hard. It's hard to stick with it. And Swami Kriyananda said, it's wonderful to do these other things like serving in the world. In fact, it's one of the most important things on the spiritual path, chanting. And Yogananda himself said chanting's half the battle. And affirmations, many things. But Swami Kriyananda said people do it much more because it's easier. It's easier. It's harder to develop the discipline of a practice of meditation. That's the hard work, staying awake to the meditation. Continuing to make the effort is very hard, but we have to do it. It's what this story is about. It's what gets us ready. Because as Swamiji said, or it might have just still been a quote from the Bible, but we never know when that moment is going to be. We just don't know. And again, not just about dying. Will we miss the divine because we weren't awake and alert? Swami Kriyananda, and making effort, also said, recently Devi published a blog, and she told a story of when she was in the car with Swamiji once, and he was talking about how much spiritual progress he felt that people at Ananda were making. And she said, before she knew it, the words came out, oh, I don't think I've changed at all since I've been in Ananda. And Swami said to her, how could you say that? Don't say that. And then he went on. Very sweetly, he said to her, you know, so much of what we let go of when we change, it was never us to begin with. It wasn't at the soul level. So we don't notice it when it's gone. And as we move more and more into living in soul realities, they're so natural to us. that we don't notice it. So we don't always see the fruits of our efforts, but it doesn't mean that we can quit making them. All of these things are the way to stay ready. You know, Swami said in this reading, and Arjuna, Krishna says it to Arjuna in the Gita. Swami named this, what is it to fail spiritually? But we can't fail spiritually. We'll never fail. Everything in existence is part of that omnipresent Christ consciousness. And the only purpose of this whole life is to find our way back. We have free will, so we might make some bad decisions along the way. We might decide meditation's too hard, or I'm not going to do it today, or I'm going to tell myself why I can be mean to this person or judge this person. There's so many ways that we can take little detours, decide it's okay to let this life go by, sometimes even turn around and walk completely in the wrong direction for a while. We've all done that, but it doesn't mean we're failing. We can't fail. God will never let us fail. It's the only thing he wants is for us to make our way there. We just need to be ready. We need to be watching. We need to be waiting. So much of that we do from the heart. We do with this devotion. We keep our lamps filled with oil just for that moment. There's a wonderful, it wasn't a story, it was a real life happening that I heard Jyotish and Devi talk about several years ago when they spent a couple of years doing pilgrimages to Babaji's cave. And one year they did 2 in a row. I remember Devi was saying it was hard. It's hard getting to Babaji's cave. I've never been there, but Devi was saying it's hard. She said at some point it's a steep climb up. She was sort of saying you have to be ready for it. So she said they were about to leave on the first pilgrimage, and this young man very exuberantly comes up to her. He says, I just know we're going to see Babaji. I just know Babaji's going to appear to us on this pilgrimage. And Devi said, wonderful. I mean, what's she going to say to him? And then she said, she looks at the people who are going on the pilgrimage. She said one person was an 81-year-old who was not in very good shape. Somebody else was there who had just had a very serious neck injury, and they were in a collar, and the doctor had said, whatever you do, don't look down. Here they are climbing up, and the doctor's saying that one man came who had recently fractured his knee, and he was not supposed to be walking very much. This is true, I remember. It's a very telling story. And then she said, the last person who comes is this young girl, a young girl, wearing flip-flops. And she said, after just not that long, the flip-flops completely fell apart. But that young woman continued. And she said, they all made it. And they got to Babaji's cave, and they had this really powerful time. And they get back down, and the young boy comes up to her and says to her, I'm so disappointed. We didn't see Babaji. And Devi said, she was just sitting, you know, her mind's going, what am I going to say to him? She said, unfortunately, one of the other people in the group spoke up and said, don't you understand? Babaji was with us all the time. Everybody made it. He took us there. He stayed with us. He got us back down safely. Of course we saw Babaji, but that young boy was looking with the wrong sense. He was looking through his senses. He wasn't perceiving Babaji's presence with his heart. He wasn't in his heart loving God, filled with that devotion. We all love God differently. God appears to every one of us in different ways. Whatever your way is, find that and really Make that your goal, just to love God like that. It came to me last night that is the beauty of our chant, "Oh God, beautiful," because it just speaks to that. In the forest thou art green, in the mountains thou art high. To the lover thou art love. God appears to each of us in the way we need to find him. That's all we need to do. We need to pay attention. We need to stay awake. We need to bring effort to loving God. That is exactly what calls to God. It's through our devotion that we receive him. To all those who could receive him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, to be awake, to stay awake, to not let our lamps run low. When we do that, then we get to hear what Yogananda heard as a young boy, with all the noise, all the confusion, all the busyness, all the distractions. That young man saying to him, "You have plenty of time to meditate later." But his master was up there meditating. What does he hear? "Come, today you will meet your master." God bless you.
Then 3 wise men came from afar, guided by the heavenly star. Christ, the light of God, had descended, that receiving him all might be saved. Thus the promise of God was maintained. Thus all true souls were called to the Lord, that their darkness be lifted, that their hearts be made whole. When Mary's babe smiled, she conveyed truth and grace, that their darkness be lifted, that their hearts be made whole. When Mary's babe smiled, he conveyed truth and grace. Then 3 wise men came from afar, guided by a heavenly star. Then 3 wise men came from afar, guided by a heavenly star. Christ, the light of God, had descended. Christ, the light of God, had come, that receiving him, all might be saved, all might be saved. 3 wise men came, guided by a star, to do honor and welcome the Christ born on earth. 3 wise men came, guided by a star, to do honor and welcome the Christ born